Okay, here's our fifth notes for this chapter. It's page 15 and 16. It says factoring difference of squares. So page 15, there's a bunch of steps you need to copy down. I'll read through them and you can pause it to write them down if you'd like. I see our problems will be binomials with a subtraction in the middle. We need to make sure they're written this way. But here's the steps for factoring. It's very, very important you have these. And I'll go through these steps slowly with you. It says, number 1, make sure that your first number is positive, so we may have to rewrite our problems. I'll show you how to do that here in a minute. On step 2, we want to take the square root of the first term, and then we want to take the square root of the second term, so we have the factors that are perfect squares. And then we're going to be writing 2 sets of parentheses for our binomials being multiplied. It's like the opposite of FOIL. And then on step 5, inside the parentheses that we actually have 2 parentheses. Let me put a second one there. The A's will go in the first position, and then on step 6, if I had 2 parentheses here, the B's go in the second position of your binomials. And then number 7 is the first one's going to get a plus sign and the second one's going to get a minus sign. So we'll have a plus and a minus with our problems there. It's like this one will have an A and a B, and this will have an A and a B. So that they look the same, the only difference is one has a plus sign and one has a minus sign. Okay, so here we go with our factoring. Remember, it said, alright, we want to make sure that the first number is positive. So if I'm looking at the first term, 4 is a positive number. So I'm okay with number 1. Number 2 says I want to take the square root of A. Well, this represents my A. It's my first term. Take the square root. The square root button is on your calculator. It's the x squared button, but it's in blue. So I'm going to do second and x squared, and that puts a little square root symbol on my calculator. If I put a 4 in there, it tells me that it is a 2. Therefore, I'm going to put my little tree on here. That means that is 2 times 2, which you probably already knew that, but I'm just showing you on the calculator. The second term, I have an x squared. Well, I don't have a number other than the understood 1, and the square root of 1 is 1, so I could have the numbers 1. But I also have the variables, the x's. I have 2 of them, which I can split this up equally and have x with an x. So I have both 1 and 2. I took the square root of A and took the square root of B. B shows you how to do the variables. Step 4 says I want to write 2 sets of parentheses. So I'm going to have 2 sets of parentheses written on my problems. Now, I'm going to take the square root of the a squared, which is the first term, and I'm going to place it in the first position of my parentheses. So here's my a term. This all represents the a. The numbers, the square roots, were 2, so I'm going to place a 2 in the first location of each one of my problems. 6 says I want the b squared to be the second term. Well, the b squared, well, I have 2 parts to it because I stretched it out here. I have a 1x as well as a 1x in both of my terms. Notice that they're identical. And then the last step says the first set of parentheses, I'm going to put a plus sign. And the second set of parentheses, I'm going to put a minus sign. And then box it in. There's your answer. Okay. Example 2. If I'm looking at it, my first step was to make sure the first number is positive. And if I look here, my first number is -1. Well, that doesn't work for step 1. I got to make sure that this is a positive number. In easy fixes, I'm going to be commutative here. I'm going to flip-flop these things. I'm going to put the 9x squared first and then the -1 behind. So I just changed the order. Now, I want to take the square root of 9. Second squared 9. You should know this, but if not, put the square root of 9 in your calculator. Do not put the x, just the 9, and it splits into a pair of 3's. Notice I have x squared, so I'm going to split my x's up equally so that I have one each. And then I have a 1. Well, the square root of 1, in case you didn't know, is just the number 1. Okay, I need to write my parentheses. And step 5 says now split up your a's equally. The a, notice, I have two parts to it, so I'm going to have a 3x and a 3x. The b's I'm going to split up equally. Each one of them gets a 1. And then I put a plus sign and a minus sign, and I'm done. This is quick. Take example 3. I just found out that on the example 2 that 9 splits into a pair of 3's. But now look at your x's. This is x to the 4th power. Now I'm not going to put an x and an x. I'm actually going to put it equally split, which would be an x squared. And then the 4's split equally into a pair of 2's. Draw your two parentheses. And I'm going to take my a's that were perfectly split and put 3x squared and 3x squared into each term of my binomial. Then I'm going to take the b squareds and place them equally. And then the first one gets a plus sign and the second one gets a minus sign, and I am done with that problem, at least. Number 4, I have 64. I'm going to put in square root of 64. Notice it's just the number, and it tells me that this splits into a pair of 8's. I have x to the 4, so like the last one, I'm going to split that in half and have x squared with an x squared, and then I have a y also. Split that in half means each one gets one y. I can put 1's there if you want. 225. Take the square root of 225, and that comes out to 15. Okay. Next step is to write your parentheses, and now your first terms have 3 parts to them. It is an 8x squared y. 8x squared y goes into both parts. Then the b squared is just the 15, and then the first binomial gets a plus sign, the second one gets a minus sign, and you are done with that problem. Okay, I'm going to page 16. I got one more problem at the top before your practice problems. Now number 5, if I'm looking at it, remember step number 1 was make sure the first number is positive. This one is not, so that means I need to rewrite the order. So for this problem, it's actually going to be 289 m4 n8 minus 625. There's my rewrite. Changes to that. Okay, that's an arrow, by the way. Now I'm ready to take square root. So if I do second squared 289, that splits into a pair of 17's. So it's 17. The M4s, that cut in half would be an M2, and the N8 cut in half would be an N4. Okay, 625 splits into a pair of 25's, so that when you write your parentheses and it brings it down, you'll have 17m squared into the 4th and 17m squared into the 4th for that particular setup. The 25's go into each set of problems. You get a plus sign and a minus sign, and you'll have your answer for that particular problem. Okay, here are our practice problems. On the first one, I'm going to split the x squareds equally into x's and realize there's an understood 1 there. I can put a 1 on each one as well. The 9 splits into a pair of 3's. If I write my binomials, the first terms are going to be 1x's, the second terms are going to be 3's. I have a plus and a minus, and there's my answer. On number 2, they split into a pair of 2's as well as a pair of x's. 169 splits into 13's. That'll give me a 2x on each binomial, and then I have 13 on each one. First one's a plus sign, second one's a subtract sign, and there's your answer. On number 3, this has a leading coefficient of a negative, so I'm going to flip this around so I have 36x squared minus 25y squared, so I had the subtraction in the middle. And now 36 splits into a pair of 6's with an x each, and 25 splits into a pair of 5's with a y each. So that when I write my binomials, the first terms will be 6x's, and the second terms will be 5y's, plus and a minus, and there's my answer. If you got all 3 of these correct, give yourself a great big smiley face.